I've been asked by Sarah to talk a little bit about the first precept of Buddhism. So the Buddha, as we know, taught the Noble Eightfold Path, which is the means by which we can eventually free our minds from all suffering, to achieve liberation from all greed and hate and delusion. And a primary component of this path is the practice of sila, or the moral precepts. And these moral precepts, they form the very foundation of this path. And in order to keep these precepts, to see the need for keeping these precepts, we have to have some understanding of the law of Dhamma or karma, which is that each of our intentional actions has a result. We can't escape this. We can't act and expect that action to have no repercussions. And when we become more aware of this truth, then we naturally become more careful about the way that we act. And sometimes, this appreciation for our actions and their results arises quite organically, particularly if we're just getting into meditation. In fact, most of us come to Buddhism because of meditation. We don't come to Buddhism because we want to live an ethical life. We want to keep the precepts and so on. We're attracted to the practice of meditation. That's certainly how it was for me. So from my own experience, I recognise that there was suffering, and that this suffering, or my experience of suffering, dissatisfaction, dis-ease, originated in my mind. It was coming from within. The source of my pain was what was happening in my mind. And so, looking for a way to deal with this, I started to practice meditation. And it worked. I could see that it was working. So I began to practice meditation regularly, and as I did so, my awareness developed, my mindfulness, becoming much more aware of myself, of my mind, and also about how the things that I did, the words that I said, the actions that I performed, had effects. Particularly, they had effects on my mind. So, for example, I'd notice if I just habitually killed some ants in the garden, I was now feeling some remorse, I was empathy, feeling their pain, if you like, realising I'd just destroyed these lives. And I never would have had that response before, but because I was meditating, becoming much more aware, less self-centred, I was just noticing more clearly how my actions were, in terms of just noticing how my actions were either helping or harming both myself and others. Every word that I say could in some way help or harm myself or another. So when we meditate, we become much more conscious of this, much more sensitive to these truths. And so, just like when you hold a hair near a flame, it automatically recoils. It's like as meditators, we naturally recoil from causing harm. So we then naturally gravitate towards refraining from harm, which is of course what the precepts are all about. So there's like an instinctive understanding that if we are to progress, if we're to deepen our practice, to deepen our meditation practice, which is, what we need to do, then we need to guard our actions. And there's a very good reason for this. So the Buddha said that the reason for keeping the precepts is so that the mind is freed from remorse. This is the purpose, or one of the purposes. By keeping the precepts, the mind is freed from remorse. When it's freed from remorse, it is much easier for it to settle in the present moment, to settle on the meditation object, so we're able to go more deeply into it. And he goes further to say that when the mind is free from remorse, then joy arises. We experience joy. And there's a whole chain of reactions like this. Joy giving rise to rapture, rapture to happiness, and so on. It goes through various steps until you realise enlightenment. So right at the beginning, you have this observation of the precepts, this practicing of restraint, which leads to this freedom from remorse and this joy, which provides a very stable foundation on which we can develop our meditation. In fact, the precepts, observing the precepts or reflecting on one's own virtue is actually one of the types of meditation that the Buddha recommended. It's actually something we can meditate upon, is our own virtue. Allowing the mind to become glad and happy and joyful and focused. So, of course, the first precept out of the 5 precepts which Buddhist lay people are expected to observe is to abstain from killing living beings. So that the Pali is panatipata, which translated as living beings, but that word pana is related to the prana, which some of you may have heard in yoga, and it means breath, or life force. So it's killing anything with breath, with life force. Now, at first glance, it may seem pretty obvious what not to kill means. But some people will start to, wonder, does it mean I can't use antibacterial toothpaste or whatever, killing the living things in my mouth? Well, some people do go to extremes, but, as a rule of thumb, it's just things that you can see. So, obviously, humans, and all the way down to, like a little ant or a bug or a flea or something. So it's these which are included generally in this first precept, is to not kill any living beings. Now, perhaps the most important factor in this precept, and all precepts, but I think particularly with this one, because it's possible to kill things accidentally, is the issue of intention. So intention, the actual intention to kill, is needed to break this precept. And this is where Buddhism differs from Jainism, which, volition or intention is not a factor. So you'll see serious practitioners of Jainism in India, as they walk along the road, they'll walk with a little brush, like a broom, in front of them, just sweeping the path so that they don't accidentally kill anything. And this, the Buddha didn't agree with this. It's your intention. So if you see that this is one of the tricky things of living in Thailand, as I am at the moment. There are a lot of ants, and sometimes if I'm walking somewhere, it's more difficult than playing a game of Twister to try and avoid the ants. And I do my best to avoid them, but I accept I may step on one or two, but the point is I make that effort to avoid it. The thing is, when we keep the first precept, we really cherish all life. So even like a mosquito, I try not to kill them. I don't use anything, spray or anything that would kill them. I don't want it, if it lands on me, I'll sweep him away. Very occasionally I might accidentally kill it, but I try my, hardest not to, even if I am very frustrated. Because it's a life, and it's their life, and we have no right to destroy that. And when we live in this way, we're living with a mind of compassion, and it's a very rewarding mind state when we develop this, and it's far more satisfying than killing something to get rid of a certain problem. It's just having this compassionate, loving, spacious mind where you know that you will not intentionally kill anything. The Buddha, he said that these 5 precepts, he regarded them as 5 great gifts. And he said that when we keep these precepts, let's just stick to the first. When we keep this first precept, then we give this gift of freedom from fear to all living beings. So we think of it as a gift. We're giving this gift that living beings do not have to be afraid of us. And that by giving that gift, we receive a portion of that freedom from fear. So we share in that freedom of from fear. Because of course, when we kill, it may not be true with like a mosquito. A gang of mosquitoes isn't going to come back and kill you because you just squashed it. But if you kill a person, or maybe a certain animal in the wild, then it's likely that there will be retribution. So you're living in fear. But, when we take into account karma, and that, the result of killing anything, the Buddha said, is after death is a painful rebirth. Of course, there are different degrees. Killing a mosquito isn't, necessarily going to give you a particularly bad rebirth. Killing a human certainly is, most likely to. But killing just as a habit, when you get used to killing things, you get used to shortening lives. And the Buddha said that by shortening lives, we attract that to ourselves, so that in the future our lives will also be shortened. So this explains why some die young. It's from former actions which attracted this, or led to this shortening of life. So, with this precept, which against killing living things, so the most serious is to kill a human being. The question arises, is, for example, abortion okay? And this is obviously a very sensitive topic, but in Buddhism it's quite clear that abortion is killing. And in Buddhist psychology, birth begins at conception. So the egg and the sperm meet along with the stream of consciousness. At that point, birth begins. And so abortion is regarded as killing. In the monastic rules, it's that the most serious rule that a monk can break is to kill another human being. And even recommending that another person kills somebody, and then they follow that advice, this is regarded as breaking that first precept. Recommending a woman goes and gets an abortion, and she follows through with it. This is also regarded as killing, as breaking that first precept. When a monk breaks that precept, he is expelled from the Sangha. So, another controversial one is euthanasia. You can understand that people, if they, getting to the end of their lives, they want to end it. If it's extremely painful, they're very sick, they're in a lot of pain. Naturally, they don't want to live with that. They want to end it. But the thing is, where do we draw the line? I suspect, many of us at times have questioned whether we really want to continue living this life. Sometimes we get overwhelmed with things, with depression or physical pain or illness, and it's a natural response to want to end it. And actually, paradoxically, Buddhism is all about ending suffering, but just not in this way, because to kill ourselves is not to end suffering at all. It's actually to prolong it, to intensify it, if we consider rebirth. This is another thing that we in the West, we're far less more skeptical of rebirth, but we can't deny that it's an integral part of Buddhist teaching. And we're really not solving anything by killing ourselves. And actually this, the act of killing yourself is is it's an act of extreme aversion towards oneself, and it leads to very unpleasant consequences. So I remember several years ago there was a documentary it was hosted by Terry Pratchett, the author, who was a big proponent of euthanasia or assisted dying. And he followed the journey of this very nice man who I guess was in his 70s, who lived in, I think it was in Jersey. Wealthy man, businessman, I think. Very amiable man, lovely wife. But he'd been diagnosed with motor neurone disease. And he wanted to travel to Switzerland, where euthanasia is legal, to end his life. And this documentary followed his progress, or followed his journey, led by Terry Pratchett. And there was a very in-depth process, many meetings with psychologists and nurses and doctors and so on, all along just confirming that this is what he wanted to do, explaining how the whole thing worked, and so on. And always he seemed very sort of enthusiastic about his decision, and he said it will be he was basically looking forward to it, that it would be this great release. This is the word he uses, it would be a great release. And eventually, towards the end of the program, they arrive at this house on an industrial estate, which is owned by this euthanasia business, which is where the people, end their lives. He ends up in this house with his wife and nurses and so on. And they're sitting around this table discussing which chocolate he would like to take with the pill that will end his life. And so it's all very light-hearted, and Peter, this guy, is kind of laughing, and I'll have the praline or whatever. Now, and then the nurse explains at some point that this poison, which is basically what it is, which will kill him, once he's taken it, he will begin to feel extremely thirsty. But it's very important that he doesn't drink anything, because it will either dilute the poison, and meaning it will take longer for him to die, or it just won't work at all. So he says, okay, yes, sure. So all the time, his rational mind is agreeing with everything. He sees, this is a sensible thing to do. I don't want to continue living while this disease gets worse and worse. I just want to end it now. It's as if it's just as simple as going to sleep. It was a very simple, childish approach to dying. Anyway, eventually it finishes with him sitting on this sofa next to his wife, who is, feeling quite pretty mixed, to put it mildly. She wants to support her husband. She clearly loves him, but she's also very sad to see him go. They're sat on this couch, and there's this nurse next to him, and he takes this poison, and he sits there, and they're sitting and just relaxing. And then the thirst kicks in, and all of that kind of calm, logical, I'm just kind of going to go to sleep and that's it, that just disappears, and he just starts gasping for water. And he's really desperate for water, and he's clearly distressed and troubled. Very uncomfortable to watch. The nurse is sitting next to him. No water, just sleep. No water, just sleep. But he's there just gasping for water. Obviously his mind is anything but peaceful. And then he sort of falls unconscious, and his breathing becomes extremely laboured, which is the sign his organs are failing. And then eventually he passes. But as a Buddhist, I was a monk at that time, watching this and recognising how important the last moments of life are in terms of what happens after death, where one goes. His last moments were anything but peaceful. He was in total distress, and what's more, he had done this to himself. So I'd be very concerned about what happened after that. So that's gone into a bit of detail there about euthanasia, but it's a pressing topic, and it seems that it's being encouraged more and more in the West now. And they talk about the slippery slope, and it's very true. We see this in Canada, and people can get euthanasia for all kinds of reasons now. Mental health issues, young people. It's awful, because these states pass. Whether they just it's easier than caring for these people. It's cheaper as well. So I'd be extremely suspicious of this push for euthanasia in the West. So to abstain from killing, this first precept, to cherish all life, to have compassion for all life, especially yourself and your own life. And just developing that luminous mind, which would never intentionally kill any other being, to refrain from that. And it's a constant practice. These precepts constantly exercise us, and that's one of their strengths. We're continually developing our mindfulness and our wisdom, judging which actions are best, practicing restraint. If there is a desire to swat that mosquito or squash that ant, there may be that drive to do it, but no, the precept stops you. It's like a barrier. It's a restraint. It's protecting, obviously, that creature, but it's also protecting you. It's protecting your mind. That's why we sometimes call these precepts protections. They're protecting you, protecting your mind from performing actions which will bring you and others suffering. They're providing that strong foundation on which you can really build your meditation practice, develop your mindfulness, develop your wisdom. And remember to meditate on your virtue, which will encourage you to treasure your practice of the precepts, because they make you feel good. It's an incredible resource, your virtue. So make sure you use it, tap into it, deliberately cultivate that joy. The Buddha said keeping these precepts brings freedom from remorse. Freedom from remorse brings joy. Joy brings rapture. Rapture brings happiness. Happiness brings calm, and I can't remember if that's the exact progress, but it's something like that. And then that leads to the ability to concentrate much more deeply, to let go. Remember that the practice of meditation, of samadhi, is a profound letting go. And it's a lot easier to let go of actions which are harmless. Much more difficult to let go of actions where we have caused harm. So, perhaps if you do another meditation now, you could just think back to your virtuous actions, perhaps today or yesterday, one or two things, or whatever you can remember, where you restrained yourself, or just the fact that you keep these precepts, that you avoid killing, you avoid harming. And just see how your mind feels light, it feels open, it's innocent. Reflect on that gift that you have given to all beings, and that you are receiving a part of that gift. And strengthen your commitment to keeping it. So, I've been going on for a while now, so I'll leave it at that, and I wish you all well in your practice.